The Executive Director of the California Residential Mitigation Program. And today, very happy with my colleague Mark Grissom, very happy to be able to introduce you to the Brace and Bolt programs. This is our new city introduction, and we're going to cover the CEA's CEA Brace Bolt and Earthquake Brace Bolt. So it's CEA BB and EBB, and they're really the same type of program, and we'll tell you just that there's just a couple of little nuances that make them different. So to get started, I will, as a structural engineer, be going through the technical information, and Mark Grissom is our customer service manager, and he'll go through the program information. So want to tell you a little bit about who the California Earthquake Authority is, so that when your homeowners are asking you questions or inquiring about the program, you just have a little bit of a sense for who we are and why we created this program. And to understand the CEA, you have to go back to 1984 when the California Mandatory Offer Law was created in California by the state legislature. Essentially what it said was if an insurance company is offering an insurance policy, they must also offer a separate earthquake insurance policy. The homeowner is not obligated to purchase it, but it must be offered, that California Mandatory Offer Law. So at the time, and in the late 80s and the early 90s, we had actually quite high take-up rates with earthquake insurance. And then January 17th, 1994, along came the Los Angeles Northridge earthquake. Magnitude 6.6 earthquake. Significant damage, particularly to residential, $40 million worth of damage overall, half of that residential and half of that insured. And the insurance companies really lost their shirts, and so they were going to stop writing homeowners insurance in the state of California. And of course, without that homeowner policy, you would lose the earthquake insurance market as well. Without an insurance market, of course, it severely impacts the mortgage market. So the economic catastrophe was significant. And so once again, the California legislature stepped in and created the California Earthquake Authority. The CEA is not an agency. It's this unique authority or instrumentality of the state. It is publicly managed. The CEA reports to a governing board of 3 elected officials: the governor, insurance commissioner, and state treasurer, 2 non-voting members that represent the 2 members of the House here in California, but privately financed. So there are over 1 million policyholders. The policy is sold through over 22 participating insurers, and it's that policyholder financing and initial funding that came from the participating insurance companies that is the private financing. And that's all great news because, of course, that money is now in reserve to pay claims and cannot be used by the State of California General Fund. The CEA has a mission to educate, mitigate, and insure, and that mitigation was part of its original charge. The idea was that insurance is really transferring risk. They also wanted to reduce risk, and so mitigation was one of the charges of the CEA from the very beginning. And so 5% of investment income at the CEA goes into a loss mitigation fund that funds the mitigation efforts. The California Residential Mitigation Program is jointly managed by the CEA with this loss mitigation fund and the California Office of Emergency Services. It's like the state's FEMA. The CRMP program was developed to offer retrofit incentives to California homeowners, and EBB is the first incentive program. And it was the first program in the state to promote code-compliant retrofits. We estimate there are more than 1 million homes that require this EBB type of brace and bolt retrofit in areas of high hazard alone. And so jointly, this group created the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program that's offered to all Californians who are in program areas. It is not just offered to CEA policyholders. So the idea here is this program is intended to benefit the entire state. So one of the reasons that we stress code compliant retrofit is this legacy of the voluntary retrofit. So code compliant, when we talk about code compliant, we are not saying that we are going to bring the entire house up to full seismic code, current code, but rather we're going after this one type of vulnerability, which is lack of anchorage to the foundation and lack of bracing in the crawl space. And we're going to bring that particular vulnerability up to a code compliant retrofit. And this legacy of the voluntary retrofit is that because a house retrofit is really done on a voluntary basis, no one is making the homeowner do this retrofit. They really could, for all these years, really do whatever they wanted or whatever they could afford or whatever a contractor essentially recommended. And unfortunately, they did studies in the late 90s, early 2000s, both in Southern and Northern California, that found that roughly 80% of retrofits were really not completed. And so unfortunately, this voluntary retrofit, many homeowners, perhaps they couldn't afford the full retrofit, or they were getting inappropriate recommendations on what to do. And, you know, they get in their mind their house is retrofitted. They find out 5 years down the road, oh, it wasn't completely retrofitted. And so the idea with EB&B is to provide them with some financing, require that they get the full retrofit of this particular vulnerability, and then you don't have to go back and revisit that vulnerability. We know that it's been addressed. Now, the code that we're talking about for this particular vulnerability is called Chapter A3. It's in the California Existing Building Code. Used to be an appendix chapter. It's now been adopted into the code, and it's essentially prescriptive provisions for seismic strengthening of cripple walls and sill plate anchorage of light wood frame residential buildings. So once again, one particular kind of vulnerability, this lack of anchorage, lack of bracing of cripple walls. It's not intended to be holistic and to retrofit the entire house, but to fix this one particular kind of problem. And A3 is the code, but there are these really fantastic plan sets that have been developed, and two that we're showing here. One is the LA Standard Plan Set. On the left, it's 1 page. On the right is the Standard Plan Set A, which is 2 pages. LA Standard Plan Set, most often used down in Southern California. Plan Set A, typically used in Northern California, but there's no restriction throughout the state. If a building department wants to adopt one or the other and utilize it, the idea here is these are essentially construction documents that are in accordance with Chapter A3. So these are not the code, but rather pre-engineered prescriptive plan sets. You can also find details in Chapter A3 that a contractor can Xerox and tailor to the house. The most important part of these plan sets is they have to be tailored to the individual house by the contractor or the owner builder with a plan. And you'll see on the right, you can see that area that's left on the Standard Plan A. For that plan of the structure to be drawn, and then of course you cut the appropriate sections for the details that go along with the house. So the code is Chapter A3, and these are appropriate construction documents that can be used prescriptively, meaning by a contractor or owner builder. It's important to note that Chapter A3 and these plan sets do have a restriction that for a cripple wall 4 feet and above, you do need to have an engineered design. So if someone has a cripple wall between 4 and 7 feet, they will need to get an engineer to give them a specific, site-specific design for their house, and it might include hold downs. The under 4 foot cripple wall retrofit does not require an engineered design. It's pre-engineered and does not require hold downs. So the type of retrofit that is prescribed in Chapter A3 and in the plan sets is very, very simple. It is sill plate anchorage, and in this picture we have shown new anchor bolts. In this case, the reason that you have a block in there for the anchor bolt to go through is that it's very common to find studs in the cripple wall space, the crawl space walls, that are 2x4 or 2x6, and then the mud sill is wider. Oftentimes it's a 2x6 or 2x8. And so you need to have that nice flat surface to put the plywood up against and create that edge nailing surface. And so if you're putting in anchor bolts where the stud is shorter or not as wide as the mud sill, you'd need to put in this blocking. So this is when you have sufficient room under that crawl space to get in there with a roto hammer to put in an adhesive or expansive anchor. Where you have what we call a sill plate condition, so you have that lack of anchor bolts, but you don't have any cripple wall. The floor sits directly on the mud sill, which is now sitting directly on the foundation. You can come in and you can bolt the house to the foundation with new foundation plates. This is a proprietary foundation plate here, easy to get at Home Depot. You can also make the foundation plate. There are specifications on the plans that allow you to fabricate one, but these are pretty simple to get. They're screwed into the mud sill, bolted into the concrete foundation, and you can see it comes in from the side, so you don't have to worry about being able to get in there with a vertically with a new anchor bolt. So this mud sill connection is, once again, is just requiring sill plate anchorage. Now you are going to also go in, and I think you can see right up in here, and put in some connections that I'll show you in the next photo, or the photo after that. So when you do have cripple walls, or the short stud walls that surround the crawl space, and a cripple wall is less than a story, so 7 feet or shorter. You can see now that none of this diagonal bracing here is providing you any seismic strengthening, and you've only got the original finishes, maybe straight sheathing or diagonal sheathing, and then the original maybe stucco or shingles on the outside. And the idea here is that you're providing stiff plywood bracing on that cripple wall. Now, this picture makes a nice clean picture showing you that plywood. It's important to note that you also need to go in and put vent holes in the plywood. And I'll show you a sketch a little bit later on that shows that if you correctly position the vent holes, you can put them near the anchor bolts so the inspector can come in and see those anchor bolts and do their inspection in only one visit. So, but this gives you an idea of where that plywood goes. Now, it's important to note that this plywood bracing is creating a shear wall. So the nailing is as important as any shear wall that they're creating in any seismically strengthened or new building. The idea is that nails should not be overdriven, and you can add a nail if you accidentally overdrive it. They should be appropriately spaced from the edge of the plywood. Essentially, it's 8 penny nails at 4 inches on center, and it is a shear wall. So the edge nailing, 8 pennies at 4, field nailing in between at 12 inches on center, and they need to properly use that nail gun. When you overdrive a nail, essentially you perforate that one ply. You can reduce the capacity of that nail by 20% by just barely overdriving it. So we encourage the contractors to treat these like shear walls. Make sure that the guy who's using the gun knows how to do that. Finally, to complete the load path, the idea here is we're connecting the wood part of the house to the concrete foundation, is that you're connecting the floor to either the mud sill, if it's a stem wall condition, sitting right on that foundation, or to the top plate of the cripple wall. And here you can see these clips are now connecting. This is either a block or a rim joist here to that top plate of the cripple wall. If this was a mud sill, you would put them in the same place. And all of the Chapter A3 and the plan sets all have the size and spacing of these clips that are to go in to make that connection. Now, it's important to note the things that they should not be doing. One of the legacies of the voluntary retrofit are folks that, frankly, there were a few contractors out there, fortunately not all of the contractors, but a few, that were really not aware of what they should be doing, and essentially would use just about every shiny new fastener on the interior of the crawl space. Now, if you have a condition where there's a post that's perhaps damaged by termites or by water damage, or it's not centered on the footing, and you're going to go in there and replace it, this is great. Use a little post cap and put it in. This is not part of the earthquake brace and bolt retrofit. All of the retrofit is done at the perimeter of the crawl space. So this is great to do this for the homeowner. Let them know that you're going to do that, get their permission. But this kind of nonsense here, where there are connectors on these interior posts, are not necessary. This hold down probably has a capacity of 5,000 pounds, and I don't know what it's attached to down here, but we have seen this, and so we've tried to put a stop to this. There is no work required at the interior, no gussets, no metal fasteners. All of the work is done at the perimeter of that crawl space. So, and we, as I said, fortunately haven't had a lot of contractors. So here's another example. Once again, if they want to come in and they want to, replace a post, you don't need to put any of this hardware for an earthquake brace and bolt. It's all done at the perimeter. We want to just explain a couple things about what a qualifying retrofit is. Once again, we're installing anchors, and so they're either expansion or adhesive anchors if you can come down from the top, or an approved foundation plate from the side, plywood or OSB sheathing. It says in these documents on the exterior, but it really should be done on the interior, and I caution people in that when you touch the building envelope, sometimes you're touching archaic, beautiful, maybe redwood siding. You're disturbing the waterproofing of the house, and it's not necessary. You can come right in and put that plywood on the inside of the crawl space. We've only had a couple of people attempt to do it from the exterior, and so we try and dissuade people from doing it. And then of course here's that sketch showing you're putting in anchor bolts, you're putting in the plywood, you've got the vents. The vents are centered over the bolts so you can see them, and then you've got those clips at the top. And, an engineered retrofit, once again, is allowed by Chapter A3, but it's required for cripple walls greater than 4 feet, or when we have unusual conditions. For example, sometimes you'll have a discontinuous foundation on the perimeter, and but there are other walls that can take the earthquake forces. And so an engineer can come in and say, well, if you retrofit this wall, you've got plenty of wall. You don't have to come in and build a new footing here. An engineered retrofit is allowed to use 75% of code-based shear. And essentially, it is not, even if you have an engineered design, it is not a holistic retrofit of the entire house. It is simply a retrofit of that anchorage and cripple wall bracing. We want to point out that building departments throughout the state are all allowing for the retrofit of crawl space, even when there are rooms or portions of the house that have slab on grade. For example, very common to have a parking garage that has concrete slab. Sometimes you'll have an addition. Sometimes you'll have maybe a sunken living room or one room that's slab on grade. The idea is to use Chapter A3 or the plan sets to retrofit the complete crawl space and utilize the perimeter of the crawl space as the perimeter walls that you are retrofitting. And then I wanted to just point out that it really saves inspectors a trip if you can position those vents over the anchor bolts so that they can look down in. Then they're not having to come out and do 2 inspections. It's also important to note that it's not the intention of the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program to essentially tell or instruct building departments how to do things, but rather we try and pass along best practices of other building departments, things that we've learned that they're learning. And it's important to note that in this, we had at the beginning of the program a lot of people asking about anchor testing. And the Structural Engineers Association of California's existing building committee did issue a commentary on Chapter A3 that recommends that anchor testing is not required. They point out that for the 4 foot or less cripple wall, they are all in shear. And if you have an engineered retrofit with hold downs, then you would of course utilize your normal testing procedures. But for these anchor bolts on the basic cripple wall retrofit, it is not necessary. So that's the end of the technical portion, and just want to mention to you that when we get technical questions, we refer homeowners and contractors back to the building department. As I mentioned, it's not our intention to dictate the rules. The idea with using the building department and the typical permit process, of course, is to utilize a system that's already in place to protect Californians and protect, of course, their biggest investment, their home. So now I'm going to turn this over to our customer service manager, Mark Grissom, who will describe the program itself and the one little area where we really need to coordinate with you, which is on the building permit. Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you.
Hello, as Janelle said, my name is Mark Grissom. I'm the Customer Service Manager for Earthquake Brace and Bolt. There is my slide. This first one is just to give you an idea of what it is that we're trying to mitigate. The reason why we're out here doing this program. These were photos from some houses that were in the Napa Earthquake in 2014. And as you can see, definitely, they've, come off their foundation, and this one is, pulled away from these steps here. As you can see, that's really a hardship for families to not be able to go back and live in their homes after something like this occurs, and we would like to try to mitigate that as much as possible. We were funded from the CEA Loss Mitigation Fund. We usually are. We were lucky enough to have 2 years of financing from the state of California, 2016 and 2017, which allowed us to expand our program each one of those years. We were able to do 1,000 extra retrofits thanks to the funding from the state of California. We also had one FEMA grant previously, and that was the Napa program that we ran. For 2019, we have another FEMA grant that we've received. That's where our funding for 2019 is going to come from. We also have additional notices of intent for grants in for 2019. So while we have some funding now for 1,000 retrofits, we're hopeful to get additional grants as the year goes on. So there's more to come there. A qualifying house is constructed before 1980. It's wood construction with a raised first floor and continuous concrete foundation. It lacks sill plate anchorage and or cripple wall bracing. Sometimes it's one or the other. It's not necessarily always both, but many times it is. And it's on a low slope lot. We sometimes get questions from homeowners in particular about the low slope lot. In most cases, even if the lot has slope, they're going to qualify. It generally has to be, relatively extreme, where you have a cripple wall. You end up having a cripple wall as it slopes down, being over that 7-foot mark that Janelle was speaking about before. So if they're, cripple walls, even if they're on a slope, but their cripple walls don't exceed that 7-foot limit, then they're going to be fine. This just to give you an idea of retrofit costs, Northern California and Southern California. These numbers are all from the EBB program. And in 2016, for Northern California, you can see we did 585 retrofits, and we've increased each year. For 2018, we are still in the process, even though we've moved over calendar year into 2019. That program is still going, so we will, exceed that 938 that's there at the moment. And you can see the difference between, there's significantly more done in Southern California, and you can see the difference in costs, and that would be a big driver, for that. In particular, the East Bay in Northern California is very hilly, which contributes to that, the extra cost. Don't get quite as much of that, and you have more bolt-only situations in Southern California, which helps to keep the cost down. But there's also a labor component to that also. We have a website. It's earthquakebracebolt.com, where we funnel people to, if they have questions about the program. We do have a call center, and we have people, my staff here, that answer emails. But really, almost anything you'd want to know about the program is on the website. We do registration. It's been once a year for most years. Last year was the first time we actually did it twice. We did it in January. We did it again in October to November. It's open for 30 days at a time. We did it early last year because we knew we had received FEMA funding for this year, and that there were going to be some additional hoops that we were going to have to go through with regard to FEMA, providing them with information and then waiting for them to get back to us. So we registered our group early, and then we've provided FEMA with the information, and now we're waiting back are waiting to get information back from them before we can open up the 2019 program. Once we do open up and we've accepted a homeowner, overall they have 9 months to complete the project. We break it up in 2 segments: 3 months for them to decide if they want to do it themselves or to get a permit, and to get the permit, or to get a contractor, and the contractor can get the permit for them, or they could have done it themselves. One additional stipulation is if the bid happens to be more than $10,000, the homeowner has to get 2 bids this year. That's not a prerequisite we had previously, but it's part of the FEMA grant that we, for the funding that we received this time. Once they get the permit, we say they have 6 months to complete, but really it's a 9-month overall thing. So if they get their permit and hire a contractor right away, they essentially have 9 months to complete the project. We also have a third party that we have do inspections. They're random, and it's a minimal number. Last year for the 2018 program, when all said and done, we'll probably have done close to 3,400 retrofits. Out of that group, the number of inspections will be a little over 100. I don't have the exact number, but it's just a small number compared to the overall number that we've done. And we're really just trying to just check to see, are the contractors doing, actually doing what's supposed to be done? Are there any things that are getting missed? One of the things that we found that Janelle had commented on before is the vent holes. We find that in certain circumstances, it's not overwhelming, but in certain circumstances, we're finding that the vent holes are being missed, and we're having to go back to those homeowners and then contractors to discuss that part of it with them. As Janelle mentioned, we require a code compliant retrofit, and that we provide up to $3,000 for that retrofit. Just so that you have an idea of what's expected from the homeowner and what we're looking at, our program requires a 2-step approval. We do a pre-retrofit assessment, what we call a preliminary approval, and the homeowner has to upload a copy of the permit with the scope of work or description, and it must state that the retrofit is in accordance with the LA City Standard Plan number 1, or it's in accordance with the Standard Plan Set A, or that it's engineered plans in accordance with Chapter A3. If your description of work or scope of work said one of those verbatim, that would be fabulous. It almost never happens, but if you can keep it as close to that as possible, it would be greatly appreciated, and it would help prevent us from having to have homeowners go back to you asking for some changes. We're not sticklers. It doesn't have to be exact, but small changes can sometimes create problems. We had one building department that they went from calling it a voluntary retrofit in accordance with and using one of those to saying to calling it a bolt down. The issue with that is that if there's bolting and bracing to be going on at that particular house, by calling it a bolt down, we don't know if they're really doing both or if they're just doing one. So the language that you choose can cause us to step back and say, okay, we don't know what's going on here. And then we have to have them reach out to you, which just causes extra work. If you have any questions regarding that type of language, or if we'll approve that language, you can always get in touch with me. We also require them to give us 3 photos of the exterior of the house. We're looking really just to see, in general, do we see vent holes on the sides? Do we see a couple of steps up to the front of the house? That just gives us an idea that, yes, this is the type of house that we would be looking for in our program. We also require 3 photos of the crawl space before the retrofit has been done. Same thing, we're looking to check the foundation. Is it concrete foundation, or are we looking at a situation with unreinforced masonry or maybe stone, which we're then going to compare to the language that we have on the permit to see that they coincide, because if there's a stone or unreinforced masonry, the chances are in many cases that we're going to need an engineered plan. They could be replacing the foundation altogether, which the LA City Standard Plan has a sort of layout for, so it wouldn't necessarily have to be engineered, but in many cases it is. So once they've provided us all that, we've checked it out, everything seems to be in order, we'll approve them for the preliminary and allow them to go ahead and do the work. So none of the work should have been done prior to that. Once we give the okay, they can go in and get started. Once they're done, we want to see a copy of the signed final permit. If you happen to have a website that lists the permit on there and will tell the status, so it'll say that it's finalized, that's great. We'll go in and actually double check the signed off sheet against that, just to make sure that they both are telling the same story. We want 3 additional photos of the crawl space now that the retrofit's been completed. So sort of proof of concept. We want to see that if it was a house that looked like it needed both bolting and bracing, that we see both of those things. In certain circumstances in the past, we've come across issues where a house definitely needs both and we only see bolting and no bracing. And then we have to reach back out to the homeowner and or the contractor to find out what the issue is. Are we, did they just sort of jump the gun, which has happened in some cases, and they take the picture because they want to show us the bolting, and then they did the bracing afterwards and didn't supply us with a photo of that. Or is it a situation where they only did the bolting and there was no bracing done, in which case it doesn't qualify. So that's the type of thing that we're looking for. We're also looking for 2 photos of a properly strapped water heater. The tankless water heater doesn't have to be strapped, but it does need to be properly installed. And we're also looking for 1 photo showing access to the crawl space, preferably with something that gives us an idea of how big that opening is. The homeowner also has to upload a contractor invoice for the project, and if there's anything on that invoice that isn't specific to the project, like Janelle mentioned earlier, sometimes they'll do interior work because they find posts that have degraded in such a way that they feel like they need to be replaced. Those things can be on the invoice, but they need to be separated from the cost of the EBB project, so we know really what the cost of the project was, separated from anything that might have been in addition to that. For owner builders, they have to upload the receipts, preferably taking out anything they may have purchased which wouldn't belong on the retrofit, but we will go through those receipts line by line, checking the items to make sure that they are appropriate for a retrofit. And then we also have a payment authorization document. It's not something specific that you in the building department would need to know, but it is something, just one of the things that they have to upload for us to tell us where that payment is going to go. We also have CEABB program in 2019. The way it runs is very, very similar, almost exact with the EBB program. That's why we don't really have anything separate. The only really main difference is the way the people get to participate. CEABB is specific to policyholders. So they also have to have house of a certain age, and other qualification things that are slightly different from the EBB program, but the way the program itself runs once they've been accepted is really the same. For 2019, we will be inviting over 14,000 people across 202 zip codes in California. Reimbursement's the same, up to $3,000. The retrofit is the same as in the EBB program. It still has to be in accordance with Chapter A3. and both the LA City Standard Plan and Plan Set A are acceptable documents, construction documents. We have a contractor directory available online on our website. It is provided to contractors who go in and take our testing, go through, take a quiz, and they have to pass the whole quiz 100% all the way through, and then they're allowed to be on the contractor directory. Now, this is really just a service for homeowners. Many homeowners just don't know where to go to even begin to look for a contractor. It's not an endorsement of any of the contractors, but it is a place where homeowners can go and they can at least start to look and possibly get contractors to come out to give them bids. We have a directory that's for engineers and architects that's very similar. The engineers and architects don't have to take a test, but they do have to go and sign up. And once they sign up, it's a service for homeowners. Should they need an engineer, they can go in and take a look and reach out to them. Here on our website is a section for building departments where you can learn more about the program. I also recommend going through the different sections up top and even the FAQs. If you have any questions about the program, like I said, pretty much everything you'd want to know about what we do is up there, somewhere in there. But the building department page in particular has a video which goes over sort of what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it, sort of what we're looking for. You can see the Cripple Wall with the vents and the access door. It also has links to our FEMA education course, so what the contractors are required to take. It doesn't have the quiz, but it has the course material there for you to be able to go through. It has a link for the LA City Standard Plan. It has a link for Plan Set A. So if for any reason you need to go in and take a look at those, and it's an easy link to go to get to them. As I said, we have information available at earthquakebracebolt.com. We also have ebbtools.com, where you can order postcards that can be customized with logos for like contractors, but even for yourself. It's got information about the program, flyers, one-page handouts for the program. We will upload like this PowerPoint presentation to it so that you can get to it if should you need it. They have sample press releases and suggested social media posts should you want to do it. And if you have a person in your department who basically would find it useful to have information, say, on how many homeowners in your city signed up for Earthquake Brace and Bolt and how many eventually went through and got paid, you can always get in touch with me. And there we go. And that's my email address right there. There's also at earthquakebracebolt.com an info@earthquakebracebolt.com email address. That email comes to my staff here. We're a very small staff, so if for some reason you lost my email address, but you had that one, you can just put attention mark on there, and my staff will make sure and get that to me if I don't even see it, because I'm very often looking through the list of those emails where people have questions. So if you have any questions specifically about the program and the way we run the program, get in touch with us, and we can tell you sort of what's going on with that. If you have technical questions about how to interpret Chapter A3 or any of those things, that's really what we rely on you for. As Janelle said a few times before, we're not, in the business of telling you how things are. we're looking to you to be the experts in that arena. So we don't tell you how to interpret those technical aspects of it, even if it happens to be different from a surrounding municipality. If some other building department is doing something one way, you happen to be doing it another. That's really between you and the contractor and the homeowner. And as far as we're concerned, what you have to say stands regardless of whether or not another building department may be doing something slightly different somewhere else. So that is it. I hope you found it informational. And if you have any questions, we're here to answer them. Like I said, just shoot me an email and I'll get back to you. We thank you for your time. Have a great day.